They say never judge a book by its cover, but in the world of the ultra-wealthy, the cover is the only thing that matters. Elias Thorne thought a cheap shirt meant a cheap mind. He thought a janitor's uniform meant a servant's intellect. He was about to learn, in front of 300 of the city's most powerful people, that intelligence is the one currency you cannot inherit. Welcome back to the channel. If you believe that true worth comes from the content of your character and not the size of your wallet, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Let's get into the story. The Silverleaf Country Club was the kind of place where the air smelled of old leather, expensive scotch, and exclusion. Tonight, the grand ballroom was transformed for the Cicero Invitational, an annual debate gala hosted by the city's wealthiest venture capitalist, Elias Thorne. Elias was a man who had never heard the word no in his life. At 55, he possessed a silver tongue, a custom Italian tuxedo, and a net worth that rivaled the GDP of a small island nation. He fancied himself an intellectual, often paying for these events just so he could grab the microphone and dazzle the crowd with his aggressive, often condescending, rhetoric. Excellence, Elias boomed into the microphone, holding a crystal glass of champagne. Excellence is not an accident. It is a birthright of those disciplined enough to seize it. That is why we are here. To celebrate the sharpest minds. In the shadows of the ballroom, away from the chandeliers, stood Marcus Freeman. Marcus was 60 years old, a black man with weary eyes and a back slightly bent from 40 years of manual labor. He wore the gray uniform of the maintenance staff. While the billionaires debated the price of oil, Marcus was worrying about the smudge on the marble floor near the podium. Marcus moved silently, clutching his mop bucket. He tried to be invisible. He had worked at Silverleaf for 15 years. He knew the members' secrets, their drink orders, and their tempers. He knew Elias Thorne was the worst of them all. As Elias stepped off the stage to thunderous applause, he didn't see Marcus. Or rather, he didn't care to see him. Elias turned sharply to shake hands with a senator and collided with the handle of Marcus's mop. A few drops of gray water splashed onto Elias's patent leather shoes. The room went silent. The music seemed to stop. Elias looked down at his shoe, then up at Marcus. His face turned a shade of crimson that matched the velvet curtains. "You clumsy idiot," Elias hissed, his voice projecting comfortably to the nearby tables. "Do you have any idea how much these cost?" "I am so sorry, Mr. Thorne," Marcus stammered, pulling a rag from his belt. He knelt immediately to wipe the shoe. "I was just trying to clear the spill before." "Don't touch me." Elias kicked the rag away. "God, it's like you people are incapable of basic spatial awareness. Is it genetic? Or is it just sheer laziness?" The insult hung heavy in the air. A few guests chuckled nervously, others looked away, embarrassed. Marcus stood up slowly, his dignity bruising. "It was an accident, sir. I'm doing my job." "Your job?" Elias scoffed, wiping his hands on a napkin as if Marcus's proximity had infected him. "Your job is to be invisible. And you're failing at that. Honestly, I don't know why we pay you. A machine could do this. A machine would probably have more conversation skills." Marcus gripped the mop handle tight. He had taken a lot of abuse over the years to put food on the table, but tonight, something snapped. Not for himself, but for the principle of it. "My son," Marcus said softly. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "My son," Marcus said, his voice trembling but growing louder. "He says that every man deserves respect, regardless of his station. He says intelligence isn't defined by your job title." Elias laughed, a cold, barking sound. "Your son? And let me guess, he's a janitor too. Or perhaps he's aiming high for assistant dishwasher?" "He is a student," Marcus said, lifting his chin. "And he could debate you under the table, Mr. Thorne." The crowd gasped. You did not talk back to Elias Thorne. You certainly didn't challenge his intellect. Elias's eyes narrowed. He sensed an opportunity. He loved bloodsport, and he loved humiliation. This was a chance to prove his worldview that some people were simply better than others. "Is that so?" Elias grinned, looking around the room, inviting the audience into the joke. "A student? Well, Marcus, I'm feeling generous. Why don't you call him? Tell him to come down here. If he can beat me, a Princeton debater, in a single round of argumentation, I'll give you a check for $50,000. And if he loses?" Marcus asked. "Then you're fired," Elias said coldly. "And you leave this building tonight knowing exactly where you belong." The room buzzed. It was cruel. It was unnecessary. But it was entertainment. Marcus hesitated. He knew his son was back in town for the weekend, studying at the local library. He didn't want to drag him into this. But he also knew his son. "Deal," Marcus said. 30 minutes passed. The gala continued, but the tension remained. Elias was holding court at the bar, joking about the charity match he was about to play. "I'll go easy on the kid," Elias bragged to a stunning woman in a red dress. "I'll probably let him make a point or two about a fairness before I crush him with economic reality. These kids today, they operate on feelings, not facts." Then, the double doors opened. Marcus was waiting there. Beside him walked a young man. He was 21 years old, tall, with short cropped hair and square glasses. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a pair of beige chinos, a slightly wrinkled white button-down shirt, and a gray hoodie tied around his waist. He looked like he had just walked out of a coffee shop. This was Julian Freeman. The crowd murmured. They saw a kid. They saw a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. Elias walked onto the stage, microphone in hand, looking down at the pair. Well, well. Marcus actually called him. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event. Elias beckoned them closer. Julian walked with a relaxed, fluid gait. He didn't look at the crowd, he looked directly at his father, giving him a reassuring nod. So, Elias sneered, looking Julian up and down. You're the prodigy? The one who's going to teach me about respect. Julian stepped up to the second podium. He adjusted the microphone. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. I'm just here to pick up my father, Mr. Thorne, Julian said. His voice was a deep, calm baritone that surprised the front row. But he tells me you've wagered his job on a conversation. That seems inefficient. It's called a debate, boy, Elias corrected him. But I suppose you aren't familiar with the formal structure. I'll make it simple for you. We pick a topic. I speak. You try to speak. The judges, he gestured to 3 of his business partners sitting at a table, will decide the winner. Julian glanced at the judges. Hardly an impartial tribunal, but I'll accept the terms. Elias chuckled. Cocky. I like it. It makes the fall more fun. Since I'm the host, I pick the topic. Let's discuss. The necessity of wealth inequality for economic innovation. It was Elias's bread and butter. He had given TED Talks on this. He had written articles in the Wall Street Journal about it. It was a trap designed to force the poor kid to complain about fairness while Elias hit him with supply-side economics. I'll take the affirmative, Elias announced. I argue that inequality drives ambition. You, obviously, will take the negative. Julian took a sip of water from the glass on the podium. He took a notebook out of his back pocket and a cheap ballpoint pen. Proceed. Elias launched into his opening statement. He was polished. He used big words and grand gestures. Ladies and gentlemen, Elias began, pacing the stage. Without the promise of immense wealth, there is no risk. Without risk, there is no innovation. If we tax the job creators to feed the idle, we stagnate. The gap between the rich and the poor is not a bug in the system, it is the engine. It is the carrot on the stick that forces society to run faster. He spoke for 5 minutes, citing historical GDP growth, referencing trickle-down theories, and mocking the concept of the welfare state. He ended with a flourish, pointing at Julian. So, don't hate the player, kid. Thank him for the game. Applause rippled through the room. It was a solid, standard conservative economic argument. Elias smirked. He had set the bar high. Julian stepped up. He didn't pace. He stood perfectly still. He didn't shout. Mr. Thorne's premise relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of the velocity of money and the diminishing marginal utility of wealth, Julian began. The room went quiet. He argues that wealth accumulation drives innovation. However, data from the last 50 years suggests that extreme inequality actually stifles innovation by creating monopolies that crush competition. When capital is hoarded at the top, it does not trickle down, it sits in offshore accounts, removing liquidity from the market. Julian wasn't using slang. He wasn't using emotional pleas. He was speaking the language of an economist. Furthermore, Julian continued, checking his notes, Mr. Thorne invokes the risk of the wealthy. But what risk? In a system of bailouts and inheritance, the ultra-wealthy rarely face true ruin. The real risk is taken by the laborer, like the maintenance staff, who risks their health and body for a wage that does not keep pace with inflation. If the engine of capitalism is ambition, then poverty is not a motivator, it is a prison that prevents the best minds from ever entering the market. Julian spoke faster now, a technique known in the debate world as a spreading, delivering high-density information at rapid speed. So, if we care about innovation, we must care about social mobility. And currently, Mr. Thorne, your engine is out of gas. Julian stepped back. The applause was delayed because the audience was processing. Then, it started, tentative at first, then loud. People were looking at each other. Who is this kid? Elias's smile faltered. He loosened his tie. The kid knew some buzzwords. That was all. He had memorized a Wikipedia page. Cute, Elias grunted into the mic, very cute. You memorized some theories. But let's talk about reality. You talk about social mobility. Look at you. You're bitter because you're on the outside looking in. You think because you read a book you understand how the world works? I built a company. What have you built? Elias abandoned the topic and went for the ad hominem attack, attacking the person, not the argument. You're just another ungrateful youth who wants a handout. You think you deserve a seat at the table just because you exist. It was ugly. Elias was losing his cool. Julian waited for Elias to finish. He looked at his watch. Mr. Thorne, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. You just committed the logical fallacy of ad hominem, combined with a straw man argument. You didn't address my points on liquidity or monopoly. You attacked my character. Julian took a step closer to Elias's podium. You asked what I've built. I haven't built a company yet. I've been busy building a case. You see, you assumed that because my father mops your floors, I must be uneducated. You assumed that meritocracy is real, yet you judge me solely on my appearance. Julian turned to the audience. Mr. Thorne claims he is a Princeton debater. I've studied the Princeton style. It relies heavily on rhetoric over substance. It works well in a boardroom, but it fails in a forensic competition. Elias turned purple. You watch your mouth, boy. I was the captain of the team in 1990. And the game has changed, Julian shot back. Let's talk about the inheritance of intelligence you mentioned earlier. You inherited your initial capital from your father's shipping empire. My father? He inherited debt. And yet, he worked 3 jobs to buy me books. He worked nights so I could study. So if we're debating who has the greater drive for innovation, I would bet on the son of the janitor over the son of the tycoon every single time. Enough. Elias slammed his hand on the podium. Who do you think you are? Julian didn't flinch. He looked calm, almost sympathetic. I think it's time for the rebuttal phase, but I believe you've run out of arguments, Mr. Thorne. Elias looked at the judges. His friends. They were looking down at their tables, refusing to meet his eyes. They knew. Everyone knew. Elias was getting destroyed. I am Elias Thorne, he shouted, the alcohol and rage taking over. I am a captain of industry. I don't need to listen to the ramblings of a affirmative action charity case. The room gasped. A collective "oh" went through the crowd. He had gone too far. Julian took off his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with his shirt. That, Julian said into the silence, is the concession. When an opponent resorts to racial slurs or personal degradation, they have admitted they have no logical ground left to stand on. Julian turned to the crowd. My name is Julian Freeman. I am a senior at Harvard University. Elias froze. I am the current president of the Harvard Debate Union, Julian continued, his voice ringing clear. 2 months ago, my team won the World University's debating championship in Madrid. I was awarded the title of a best speaker in the world. Julian reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a pamphlet from the gala. I saw the guest list online. I saw you were speaking. I told my dad I wanted to come hear the great Elias Thorne. I wanted to see if the man matched the myth. Julian tore the pamphlet in half. He doesn't. The silence in the Silverleaf ballroom was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the buckets. Elias Thorne stood there, mouth slightly open, the color draining from his face. He looked from Julian, to the judges, to Marcus. Marcus wasn't looking at the floor anymore. He was standing tall, a smile beaming across his face, tears of pride welling in his eyes. One person started clapping. It was the senator in the front row. Then the woman in the red dress joined in. Then the judges. Within 10 seconds, the entire room was giving a standing ovation, not for the billionaire, but for the janitor and his son. Elias shrank. For the first time in his life, his money couldn't buy him a way out of the room. He looked small. Julian walked over to his father. He put his arm around Marcus's shoulder. We're leaving now, Julian said to Elias, though he didn't bother using the microphone. And regarding the wager, keep your $50,000. But my father resigns. Effective immediately. Julian, wait, Marcus whispered. The money. We don't need his money, Dad, Julian said loud enough for the front row to hear. I just signed a clerkship with the Supreme Court starting next fall. I think I can cover the rent from now on. They turned and walked out. The double doors swung shut behind them, leaving Elias Thorne alone on stage, surrounded by luxury, yet completely bankrupt of respect. The story of the Cicero Invitational didn't stay in that room. One of the waiters had recorded the debate on his phone. By the next morning, the video titled Janitor's Son Destroys Billionaire had 2 million views. Elias Thorne's reputation took a nosedive. His board of directors, embarrassed by the viral humiliation and the public display of bigotry, voted him out as CEO 2 weeks later. He retreated to a private island, a bitter man who never understood what hit him. As for Marcus, he never mopped another floor. Julian finished his degree at Harvard and went on to become one of the most feared and respected civil rights attorneys in the country. But on the wall of Julian's high-rise office, amidst the degrees and awards, hangs a framed photo. It's not of a judge or a president. It's a blurry picture from a cell phone video. It shows a young man in a hoodie standing next to an older man in a gray uniform, both of them walking away from a podium with their heads held high. The caption reads, "The night we bought our dignity back." This story reminds us that arrogance is a fragile shield. You never know who you are talking to, and you never know the battles someone has fought to get where they are. Treat the CEO and the janitor with the same respect, because in the end, we are all just people trying to do our best. If this story moved you, please smash that like button, it really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were in Julian's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.